Question. Can you give me your insights on antidepressants? I have been on and off these for 15 years now, since the death of my son. I have had terrible crashes on and off in mental health each time. Mother Mary gave an answer that it blocks your access to your I am presence and intuitive abilities. I can see this tendency in myself. I'm not sure what to do to get off of these drugs so I can connect to my I am presence and have insights to my creative abilities to help raise life and complete the divine plan I made for this lifetime. Okay, so this is a difficult question for me to answer because I haven't personally been on antidepressants, so I don't have direct experience with it. And I was in a sense tempted to ignore the question, but I still felt I should at least give my 2 cents worth. So first of all, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not licensed, I'm not educated to diagnose people. So what I'm saying here is just really something you need to not take as gospel, not take as some authority telling you to do this, but just see how this resonates with you individually. And what I would say here is, the question is how to get off the antidepressants. But why don't you step back a little bit and say, why did I get on the antidepressants in the first place? And the person obviously mentions the death of his son, which is one of these deeply traumatic experiences of life. And so if you ask yourself, here I experienced a really traumatic event in my life. And I couldn't deal with it. It was overwhelming to me. It was too much. So I decided to try this chemical that whoever recommended this to you to see if that would help me. But why couldn't you deal with it on your own? And I would suggest first that it's because we have grown up in a deeply dysfunctional society. I mean, I've said it before, we have this advanced society that thinks it has to teach us all kinds of things in school about geography of faraway places, about mathematics and computers and all these kind of practical skills. I'm not trying to say we shouldn't learn these things, but I'm just saying the one thing that affects everything we do in life is our psychology. And the educational system, even in the most advanced nations, still don't make it a priority to teach children how to deal with their own psychology, specifically with feelings. In this case, you have a very traumatic experience. Obviously, it leads to feelings. But as a child, did you ever learn how to just deal with emotions? No. Now, there are some countries that are starting to do this, but I foresee it will greatly be expanded in the coming decades. But what I'm just trying to say is, you didn't know how to deal with the feelings that came up after this trauma, because you were never told, you never learned. So this would be my first recommendation is study all you can find on psychology, how to deal with these feelings. Now obviously this person is an Ascended Master student, and the Ascended Masters have given a lot of teachings about it. But I'm not trying to say that this should be enough for everybody. I myself studied many spiritual teachings, many spiritual books, used different kinds of therapy. So, I would say first there, study, read on your own, but also look for forms of therapy that you haven't tried. I myself used a form of therapy called EMDR, which stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. EMDR, it's quite a mouthful. But anyway, it was, many people have found that it has been effective for helping them deal with trauma. But that's just one possibility. There are others. But it's also a matter of learning how to deal with feelings, how to process feelings, how to channel them in a way that helps you move on. Because in a sense you could say, okay, no, let me not get ahead of myself. So study this, try alternative forms of therapy instead of the traditional talk therapy, and then as you become more aware of dealing with feelings, and as you perhaps resolve some of the trauma, you might be able to get off the antidepressants without the crash, where it becomes easier. Might. Again, I don't have direct experience of this. So this is one thing. But another thing I would say is that when you're talking about depression, to my view of this, it must be that you feel stuck. You feel you can't move on. There's something you can't overcome. It's like you are walking, but you are tied to a pole with a rubber band, and you can stretch the rubber band, but it's always pulling you back. And so I would try to, well, first of all, you can study this phenomenon also. How do people get over loss? There's actually an old book by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross called Necessary Losses that seeks to help people deal with this severe loss. So this is one thing. Study also the psychology of why other people have trouble letting go and what has helped them. Because when you feel stuck, you are not stuck. You are not actually stuck, but your mind is stuck. You are stuck in your mind because it's something you don't see. There's a shift that hasn't happened. And again, by studying the psychology involved with it, perhaps that shift will happen and you'll be able to move on. But the other thing I would say is, when you're an Ascended Master student, the essence of Ascended Master teachings is moving on from anything on earth. And, I look back at my personal life, and I have not had the death of a child. And I can not even imagine how difficult that would be. But I have had certain traumas. I've been divorced 3 times. I've moved from different countries and this and that. I've actually stood with 4 times, had to start over with absolutely nothing. And so I've had, some difficulties in my life at least. And I always had a certain intuitive sense that I can't let anything on earth get to me. I can't let anything on earth get me down. Because I have to move on. I have somewhere to go. And that is ultimately my ascension. And as I've explained before, I saw that ascending means leaving everything on earth behind. So you can't allow anything to make you stuck. And that means that no matter what happens, even how severe it is, you have to find a way to move on. You always have to move on. I mean, I was just, yesterday, I was at the funeral of one of my classmates from high school who died suddenly. And I was talking to one of my other classmates whose wife died a number of years ago. And he is married again. And he was telling me how he felt that, yeah, you just have to move on. You just have to find a way to move on with life. And I said to him, yeah, you're absolutely right, because you see people who don't, they get stuck. And so perhaps there's a shift you can make there that you haven't made, that how important it is to move on. And I know it can maybe seem insensitive, but the person is talking about the divine plan. I I want to free my creative abilities to help raise life and complete the divine plan I made for this lifetime. Well, your divine plan does not involve you being stuck anywhere. It involves you moving on. And that's why, you have to find some way in your mind to step outside. The conscious you has to step outside of this separate self you created in order to deal with the loss of your son and reconnect to the divine plan and say, how can I move on? I just have to leave this behind. It's a tricky thing, I realize, because I can see in myself how I dealt with difficult situations. Because I remember actually, back in 1987, my father died. He was only 64. And my mother was suddenly left alone. And some years later, I talked to her about how she had dealt with the situation. And she told me, well, everybody was just telling me, you have to move on. And so I just had to move on. But I also knew that what that meant for her was suppressing all the feelings. Just suppressing them, ignoring them, pushing them back for her. And that's not, of course, what I'm recommending as an Ascended Master student. I'm recommending you process the feelings, and that's why I'm talking about different forms of therapy. EMDR was helpful for me to process feelings, but others. And then, of course, you can use the Ascended Master decrees and invocations to invoke spiritual light to transform the energy that is part of the emotions. So I'm not talking about, when I talk about moving on, I'm not talking about ignoring the feelings or suppressing the feelings. I'm talking about dealing with them. But there does come a point where you just have to make a decision to leave this behind. It's enough. It's enough. I have to move. I want to move on. I am moving on. And so now I want to reach back to what I said in the beginning. Why did you get on the antidepressants in the first place? And again, I might sound insensitive because I haven't had the same experience. But I just know that for me, I wouldn't even consider taking antidepressants. It wouldn't even occur to me. That's why I never used alcohol or any form of drugs. I don't want to chemically alter my state of mind because I feel that my state of mind is my responsibility. And I need to take command over my state of mind. That's what my whole life and the spiritual path has been about. So I understand, because I have met people over the years who have looked at me when I said something similar like this and said, oh, well, it's easy for you. That's easy for you to say. And I understand that it is, because I probably made that shift in a past lifetime, that I'm responsible for my state of mind. And I don't remember how I made it. It's kind of like these people who said they had a spontaneous awakening or enlightenment. And so I was born in this lifetime with this sense that I'm responsible for my state of mind. So I may not be able to grasp, if you are not born with that, how do you make the switch? But I still think there's a way for you, when you have a spiritual teaching, when you have the concept of a divine plan, to make that shift of saying, I understand now that the spiritual path is about resolving psychology. And I am consciously making the shift. Now, I am taking responsibility for my state of mind. It's a matter of resolving something in my psychology instead of masking it with antidepressants. I think, again, I didn't consciously make that shift in this lifetime. So I don't know if I can tell you how to. I don't know that you could just, do it just like that, but you have to work with it and find a point until you come to that point where you say, okay, I am taking responsibility for my state of mind, and I need to do whatever I can do, give the decrees, the invocations, use various forms of therapy. But there's another thing I think you need to do to resolve this, because I do know from my own that obviously we have resistance in our psychology to taking an important step forward on the path. So there will be resistance to you taking responsibility for yourself. And the way this will most likely form is that you have these subconscious selves, and they'll try to flood your mind with this very traumatic, depressive, emotional energy, so that you are overwhelmed by it. But again, why did you take antidepressants? Because you were overwhelmed by feelings that you couldn't deal with. And you thought, I need relief. So if I can just get relief, it'll be better. Okay, but you have now been on antidepressants for a while, and it doesn't seem like it's giving you the relief you want, not permanently. So my suggestion is to try, and this is again, you have to evaluate this individually, whether you're ready for this. But I've experienced in my life that fear, there's only one way to overcome fear, because what you're dealing with here is a fear of what will happen if you go off the antidepressants. But it's more than that. What will happen if you face these feelings that are overwhelming? There's a projection from your subconscious selves that it's dangerous. You should be afraid to look at the feelings. And what I have found is there's only one way to deal with that, and that's to go right into it. I've told the story before how I let myself be locked in a dark room with a skeleton, so that I overcame my fear of skeletons when I was 12 years old. But I've done this with many things, with emotions, and I don't do this just out of the blue. I obviously use the decrees to the Ascended Masters to dissolve the energy. I ask the Ascended Masters for help. Mother Mary has offered that she will help us, take us by the hand, and help us look at these things. And so I come to a point where I decide I'm not going to avoid the feelings. I'm not going to push them aside. I'm going to go right into them. And what I have found is that, and I think many other people who have done the same thing, is that you go right into them, and in the beginning it's like going into a hurricane, but when you reach the center, it's calm. You may have various fears that there's going to be some monster that's going to get you, but you go in there and you realize there is nothing here that's real. There's nothing here that can get me. And when you experience that, it's like the feelings don't have the same grip over you anymore. Whereas what I'm saying is when you're afraid to look at them or go into them, they have a grip over you because you're trying to avoid something. But when you go into it, you realize there was really nothing to avoid because it doesn't have power over you. And that helps you take responsibility and see that this is not as overwhelming as it looks. You can actually deal with this. You can resolve it. Again, there is a book given by the Ascended Master called Healing Your Spiritual Traumas. And that might be helpful, but since the person is an Ascended Master student, maybe you already used that book. But then, as I said, other forms of therapy. Study various things of how other people have dealt with loss. And find a way to shift your mind so you simply say, I don't need the antidepressants because I have moved on from the loss that I experienced. I have simply moved on. And in that respect, perhaps, I don't know if this always works, but it has certainly worked for me in situations. You look at what was the thoughts I had in that situation. What was the thoughts? In this case, my son died, or I got divorced, or I lost everything, or whatever. What was the thoughts I had? How did it make me look at myself? How did it make me look at life? What did I think was going to happen, or what did I think could no longer happen because of this event. And try and become more conscious of that, and try and see if there's actually some illusion there that's limiting you, that's holding you in a limited state. And I know I'm probably throwing out too many things here, but basically when you have the teaching about the subconscious selves, you realize subconscious self, once it's created, it wants to survive. It can only survive by keeping you in a limited state. And so what I have asked myself sometimes is, what is this illusion behind this subconscious self? And what excuse does it give me for not doing something? So you're talking about I want to expand my creative abilities to help raise life and complete my divine plan. So what is the self that was created as a result of this trauma? What excuse is it giving you for not being creative, for not moving on with your divine plan, for not even connecting to your divine plan, but keeping you, oh, I'm in this little limited state because this happened to me and I can't get over it? What's the excuse? And is this really more important to you than your divine plan and your being creative and helping raise life? So anyway, perhaps I'm just being insensitive here because I haven't been in the exact same situation, but I can only explain it as I see it. But I'm sure there are many other people out there who could help you move on from a loss. And there are probably also support groups. Don't know if that would help, but as I said, there are books, there are therapists, and different kind of therapies. So I would try everything.